Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. I've got a super fun show for you today. Way back in the beginning of this podcast, many years ago, I interviewed a gentleman who was part of the tourism board of Banff, and that episode remains the most popular episode I've ever done on the Active Travel Adventures podcast, which is a great indicator of how popular Banff is. Today, I'm happy to report that my affiliate Active Adventures now offers a multi-activity adventure travel trip to Banff. So I've got one of their guests on board today, and she's super fun. And so I'd like to share with you exploring Banff through the eyes of the guests, which is how I usually like to do it here. So I'm really excited about the show, and let's go ahead and get started. It's a fun show today. Hold on, before I forget, because Active is one of my affiliates, they do offer my listeners an exclusive $200 discount. All you have to do on any Active Adventures or Austin Adventure tour, just type in the promo code ATA, ATA 200, and you'll get $200 off any booking. Doesn't have to be the Banff trip, anything they offer. Any multi-day trip, I should say, that they offer. So with that, let's get on with the interview. I've asked Michelle to come on the program today to tell us about her adventures in Banff with my affiliate Active Adventures. Welcome to the program, Michelle. I really appreciate your time today. To start with, I'd like to kind of get a feel about who we're talking to. Would you mind maybe give us a little background on how you got into adventure travel, maybe your age, that kind of thing, so we know how you compare with maybe us?
So I am 57 years old. This trip we took, my husband Greg and I, this is actually our first, if I would call active adventure vacation. We like to ski and hike and bike and kayak, but I'd call myself a regular, recreational exerciser. I'm not, some crazy marathon runner or anything. But friends of ours really wanted to go to Western Canada for their husband's 60th birthday. And my husband and I had talked about going out to Western Canada as soon as we had an empty nest. And our youngest one had just gone off to college. And so we signed on for the trip. And we didn't really plan it. They planned it and sort of sent us the materials. And it sounded just too wonderful to pass by, honestly. They had taken a trip with Austin Adventures previously. I think they went to the south of France and had a really nice time. So we felt good about the company, thinking that they would put together a good trip.
Very cool. Yeah, and I should mention too that Austin Adventures merged with Active Adventures. So sometimes we'll use those names interchangeably, but they both offer active vacations. And this particular one I like because it's a multi-activity, multi-sport. You're hiking, you're biking, you're paddling, you're doing fun things every single day, but different things every day.
Yeah. Yes, it was amazing. And that's exactly what we wanted. We didn't want to go on a trip that was solely biking. We wanted to and when you go to Western Canada, you have to get up and hike up in the mountains, and you want to get on the water, and you want to hike on the glaciers. It's beautiful, beautiful land.
Yeah, and that's what Banff is known for. The landscape is stunning. In fact, I've been doing this 5 years now, and an earlier Banff episode I did remains the number one downloaded episode of the Active Travel Adventures podcast. That's how popular it is.
Wow. Well, I can understand why, because the scenery is extraordinary and you can see pictures, but it doesn't quite get you the way it does when you're standing there and looking at water that is so blue you can't even describe the color blue.
Yeah, it's almost like the turquoise of the Southwest.
Yes, yes.
And the reason for that, as I understand it, is the glacial silt.
Yes.
The way that the sun, I guess, actually doesn't reflect the blue, so it gives it that blue, really surreal color.
It's incredible, truly incredible.
So how about, because the landscape is the number one appeal, I think, for the area, how about doing the best you can to kind of describe some of the landscape?
Sure. So we had the opportunity to bike through mountain passes, through woods, through scenic overlooks. And so you get all of the beautiful greenery and a lot of evergreen greenery. So you get that deep green and very dense. But then they would take us on these little secret magical hikes where you would go into the forest and you thought you were doing a forest hike. And there was actually one hike we did, and I don't know whether I should share this or not, but they had us walk. We were 10 people. We were 5 couples and 2 tour guides who were amazing, Heather and Will. And they had us break into two groups of five, and they actually had us close our eyes and put our hands on top of each other's shoulder, and each one of them led the two groups. And this was later in the trip, and they said, "Do you trust us? We're going to have you close your eyes." And so we did this first little bit of this hike blindfolded, essentially. And then when we got to the point they wanted us to be at, then they had us at the same time all open our eyes. And we were on an overlook over a lake that was that blue that we've just described, with jagged mountains. And this was, early September, but there was snow at the peaks of the mountains, and it was just breathtaking. And you kind of you get it all. We had beautiful warm weather because it was early September, and but we had cool nights, and we had wildflowers. So they took us on a hike of the Sentinel Pass, which is a 7-mile hike with a 2,400-foot gain. But we did it with switchbacks. So it wasn't like you were climbing straight up a mountain. And when we got to the top, you get above the tree line. So you go through the trees, but then you get above the tree line and there's a pool. And we had a picnic at the pool, and it's just extraordinary. And the guides were amazing. The amount of knowledge they had, they were educating us about history. They were educating us about flora and fauna. They were educating us about weather. They were educating us about local food. It was really quite fascinating.
Very cool. And I'm looking for my notes here on that Sentinel Pass. You're up close to 9,000 foot elevation. Was there any issue with dealing with altitude, or were you able to go slowly enough that was not a problem?
There was one person in our group who held to the back because she was definitely having a little bit of trouble acclimating with the altitude. But they were really great about that too, because they had one of the guides was at the front, one was at the back, and people moved at their own pace. So the people who really wanted to charge ahead were up front. The people that wanted to stop and take some pictures sort of were in the middle. And anybody who really wanted to chug slow, there was no too slow. The person at the back never made you feel badly. And she did make it to the point. She just took it much slower. So it was really nice in that way because it was sort of level set, even though the group was composed of people that might have been at different levels.
Yeah, and I do like that they generally do have the two guides. Let's back up a little bit and start at the beginning too. So my understanding is you go in and out of Calgary.
Yes.
Which is a very easy airport to get in and out of.
Yeah, so you fly into Calgary. We went a couple of days ahead of time so that we could explore Calgary. And then they pick you up the morning of day one at 8 a.m. at your hotel. And if there's multiple couples at different hotels, they go to each hotel. And they then took us on the drive from Calgary on our way up to Banff. And we stopped two places. We do a 13-mile paved trail on the Legacy Trail, which was a real easy kind of flat, get to know you, get comfortable on the bikes, start to get involved with the scenery bike ride. And then we get to Marble Canyon, and then it's a national park. We did a hike. And again, they start you off easy, and they want everybody to feel comfortable. I think they also want to get to know us and see who's where and who's interested in what. So on day one, we got a hike and a bike in.
Yeah, very nice. And that is true, I think, of all their tours. Day one is kind of an assessment. Who is this group? Let the group kind of gel and get to know each other and form a team, but also the guides can see where people are physically, so they can kind of tweak things if necessary. So it's a nice easing into it.
Yeah, and the people were really quite nice. We went with two other couples. So there were only 5 couples, and we went with 2 that we knew, and then there were 2 others that didn't. None of them knew anybody else. And everybody just, they take you in a van. And so you spend a lot of time in that van together with everyone. And so you really get to know each other. And it really was nice. We all exchanged phone numbers at the end because it's quite an intimate way to travel with people. And they have all the equipment. They have the bikes. They have everything that you need, the helmets. My husband is 6'4" and is a mountain biker here at home. And so he had called in advance because he wanted to make sure that they had a bicycle that was going to be the right size for someone of his height. And they took care of that beautifully. They had a larger bike and all the equipment that we needed. So it was nice. No one was uncomfortable. Everybody had what they needed.
Are the bikes, do you have the option of the e-bike?
This trip we didn't, but I believe the e-bikes just keep getting more and more popular. And so I have to think that they may offer that now, but we all used regular bikes.
Right. And perhaps they could make the arrangements if that was necessary. Because sometimes one person may not be as much of a biker, or they just want that safety net of knowing that they've got a little oomph if they want it.
Oh, yeah. I think that's becoming a more popular way to do even those all bike tours in Europe, that people want the e-bike so you can ride when you want and that you can cover a whole lot more distance.
When they offer it, I take it because
Yeah, sure.
I like that option. And it looks like you're hiking pretty much on paved trail on all of your bike rides. How was the grade? Was any of it like tough, or was it pretty gradual?
No, you know what? They were not hard. They were mostly paved. That first day, it was a paved trail. And then on the fifth day, we did a bike ride as a group at the Banff Springs golf course. And it was a 9-mile loop. It was a paved trail. And so it was very manageable. But we had an amazing experience there because part of the way through, there was a bull elk.
Cool.
And it was mating season for the bull elk. And we stopped to see a bull elk walk past us with 36 female elk, which was his harem, his herd. I don't know. And it was unbelievable to see. And so that was the other thing on this trip is we saw animals. They had no qualms about stopping on the side of a road if there was an interesting animal for us to all see.
What a great experience to see that.
Yeah, it was cool. And you know what? Apparently in Canada up there, they track some of where these animals go. So they have built overpasses over their highway specifically for animals to move over. So the guides had some sense of where we would see animals. It was very cool.
Very nice. Very nice. Let's talk again a little bit about the group. So the different couples, what would you say the age span was?
So one couple were in their 70s and they were from the South, the Southern US, but they were in great shape for people in their 70s. They were involved in everything. They did everything. In fact, the husband and my husband did a little offshoot bike ride one day where there was an opportunity to go do something else, and they rented mountain bikes and did some true mountain biking. The next couple seemed to be in their 60s and very interested in photography and nature photography. And then the two couples we were with were just approaching 50. So 60. So we were just younger than they were, mid to late 50s.
Do you think somebody traveling solo would have been able to blend in with the group?
Totally. Totally. It was a really nice group. And I think anybody would have been made to feel comfortable.
Okay, good. Yeah, because so people were kind of, as you're walking or biking, you might not necessarily be with your partner. You might be chatting with somebody else.
For sure. We all became very friendly and we would go off in groups. One time when my husband and this gentleman went off for a mountain bike ride, all the ladies went off and got coffee, and the town of Banff is exquisite. And we just went and had coffee. So people were just very friendly. And even at dinner, we didn't always just sit with as couples. We would move around depending on who was talking to whom about what.
And when you talk about being in the van sometimes, it's not like you're looking at something ugly out there, right?
No. It was a nice van. It had comfortable seats. Again, everyone was very polite. We all rotated. So sometimes you were in the front, sometimes you were in the back. Nobody, was like, this is my seat for the whole trip. So we were very comfortable.
And the views outside, I'm sure, are still something nice to look at as well.
When you're in Western Canada, even when you're on the highway, you are looking at gorgeousness.
That's what I've seen from photos.
Oh, it's amazing.
It may have been an hour and a half bus ride to Banff from Calgary, but it was probably jaw-dropping.
Yeah, and I have to say that, the initial drive from Calgary to Banff is the longest drive. And then in between, we stayed in two different places. The drives are not very long. And even when we drove, we went to a glacier, the drives, they're not terribly long. So it was really delightful.
Cool. Well, since you mentioned the lodging, let's talk about the lodges that you stayed in, two of them, as I recall.
Yes. The first one, when we first left Calgary and were on our way, we stayed it was more of a lodge situation. It was lovely. It was small cabins. It was attached, but it was cabin style along a stream. And you felt very in the woods. And They had every day, everybody gets together for breakfast. The rooms were comfortable in size. The beds were comfortable. It was just it was a lovely accommodation. And then when we got to Banff, we stayed. Banff is a town. It's a small town surrounded by majestic mountains, but it is a town, and they have what I'd call, sort of more regular hotels. So that was a more classic hotel type situation.
Very nice. Very nice. We'll talk about Banff a little bit more later. Okay, so let's talk some more about what you actually did. So we talked about the Calgary day. We talked about day 2 doing the Sentinel Pass. And then how about when you did the glacier hike? Talk about that.
So that was the third day, and we did the Athabasca Glacier. And it's about 2 miles that you walk. They take you in a bus. They give you the history of the glacier. It's quite interesting when you get there because there are markings that show you where the glacier was at different years. And so it's very dramatic to see how the glaciers have melted. And so as you approach with the bus, you start and you see, 1927, and you drive further in 1940 something. And, you really can visually see how much melting there has been. But then when you get to the ice, they give you these crampons that you put onto the bottom of your boots, your hiking boots, and you start hiking on the glacier. And it was a terrific guided tour on the glacier. Again, it wasn't so challenging that an everyday person couldn't do it. It was a hike. You have these things on your boots, and so you're just walking. It wasn't slippery. You didn't feel like you were sliding, but you got a whole different perspective hiking and looking at the glaciers, hearing the history of the glaciers. There's areas where there's actually cracks in the glacier where you can see in, and you see all those different layers of blue. And they talk about what you mentioned earlier about why is it so blue? And there's actually a point where you can lay down and drink that water. And it's just something to behold.
And so is it white and blue, or what does it look like?
The glacier itself is really white. The area around the glacier where there's been meltage is brown. It almost looks like, you'd see like the surface of Mars. It seems just brown. But then you get to the ice, and the ice is white. But then within the ice, when you can see within, there's like striations of different shades of blue and even a little bit of green. And you see above the glacier, there are roads, and you can see people on buses. There are a lot of different tours that don't actually get onto if you don't have the ability to walk on the glacier, people can see it from a tour bus, but it's just a different perspective when you are physically on the ice.
I've only had to use crampons once, and that was on a glacier in New Zealand. And what I remember about that is they told us when we're going downhill, your inclination is to go down sideways. Like, no, walk straight down. Like,
yeah.
And it's so counterintuitive, but it is how you do it. And after the first time, like, okay, that worked pretty well.
Yeah. It's also, it's not as steep. And so you don't feel like you're going to fall over.
Yeah, cool. That sounds like a really fun day.
Yeah, oh gosh, it's all so extraordinary.
Yeah, that's got to be otherworldly. And then you did something really fun the next day too. Now you do one of my favorite things. You went rafting. Tell us about that.
Yes. So we did 2 things that day. We went rafting and we went to Lake Louise, which is also incredible. So the rafting I think it was called the Kicking Horse River, and it was class 3 and 4 rapids. We had 2 boats. We decided as a group we were going to go a women's boat and a men's boat. And so we had the male guide, Will, took all the ladies on one boat, and Heather, the female guide, took the men on the other boat. And there were a couple of ladies in there that had never whitewater rafted before. And it was great rapids. It was super fun. They taught us what to do, and everybody, we took turns being in the front. The person in the front usually gets a little wet, and it was just such good fun. And it's seeing just similar to seeing the majesty of the landscape from the glacier when you're down in the water looking up and you're seeing the landscape from below. It's incredible. And they have old trains, the old Canadian Pacific Railway, that these trains would go by periodically. And my husband is a train buff. My husband's father was a train buff. And so he was just going crazy looking at the trains that were coming by periodically. It was really, really spectacular.
The folks that had never rafted before, how did they like it once they'd done it?
They liked it. One woman was a little nervous. She had never rafted before because she was a little afraid, but she got right in there. She got wet. She got, the thing about a raft with 6 people in it is that not everybody has to be paddling properly. Certainly the guy did the yeoman's part of the work, but they were really great about calling out left, right, paddle here, stop, and it was great. We never tipped. We never fell in. The water at that time of year was not cold, so that's good if you did fall in.
And that was my next question. Did you have to wear wetsuits? I don't know what the weather is. It always cold up there, or it gets seasonably warm?
The air temperature is warm, but they did have us wear wetsuits.
Okay.
So you get there, you get fitted for a wetsuit. Not only did we have the wetsuit and a hat, and there's like a raincoaty thing that goes over it as well. So they really are trying to keep you warm. And the wetsuit keeps you comfortable and warm.
It does.
Yeah.
In fact, also New Zealand too, because it was cold and the water was very cold. So I rafted in a wetsuit, and there was a place they let us float in the water. And I was like, are you sure I'm not going to freeze to death? They said, no, you'll be fine. And they were right. I was warm. I couldn't believe it.
And when water gets into the wetsuit, the water actually gets heated. So
yes,
there's no chill.
Yes, very cool technology. Yeah, so that's very fun. And you said you did something else fun that day as well.
So that was also the day that we went to Lake Louise. So after we rafted in the morning, then we went to Lake Louise, which again is postcard beautiful, crystal blue. They have a famous tea house called the Lake Agnes Tea House, and there's a trail there, a little 4-mile loop. When we went to Lake Louise, they kind of let us loose. They gave us a time frame. They said, we're going to spend 2 hours here, and you're on your own. You guys can walk and see what you want. A lot of people bought postcards because it's a very picturesque place that people have seen. One of your screensaver on Microsoft is up there at Lake Louise. And so they let us go. There's a beautiful hotel there. I want to say it's a Ritz-Carlton, but I'm not sure. Several of us went in and had a cocktail and looked out, and it was just it was a nice afternoon after a morning of whitewater rafting to take in different scenery and see a different kind of environment.
Was that Ritz-Carlton one of the former railroad lodges?
I'm not sure.
Does it look like it was like full of wood? And because the railroads are clever, they would, to get the tourists and to get people on the railroads, they would build these really fancy lodges that people could go stay in.
Yeah, I mean, it is beautiful, and there's so much history, and they have pictures of women with petticoats and umbrellas, walking around Lake Louise, and it's really cool.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was. Yeah, very fun. Well, that sounds lovely. In fact, that reminds me a little bit of Glacier National Park up in the Waterton side.
Yeah.
Very nice. So then you're back on the bike again the next day. Tell us about that.
So then that's when we headed to the golf course, the Banff Springs golf course. And we did that 9-mile loop, and we saw the bull elk, and that was very cool. And that was an easier bike ride. There was a point in the middle where people could peel off if they wanted to just sort of roam around Banff, or they could continue to do the whole ride. So they gave us several times, they gave us options for people to bail. And they always had the van. And so even when we were doing other things, if someone didn't feel up to it, or there was a problem or whatever, there was always the option of the van, which I think is a good peace of mind for someone who may be a little nervous.
Definitely. And I see too, some people had the option, or people had the option of plunging into the lake. Did anybody do it?
Nobody did it. Nobody did it.
I don't know that I would.
But it was beautiful. We had rented kayaks there and took a paddle on kayaks there, which was really nice too.
Very nice. Fun. And then you have a nice farewell dinner that night. What was that all about?
Yeah. So, the meals are wonderful. They picked great restaurants every time, very thoughtful. We had options so that everybody's, tastes could be met. And then the last night we had this, it's almost like a, going away party. And they had made this beautiful video they had been taking pictures all along. We didn't even realize. And they put together this video, which they made available to all of us after the trip, that had pictures that none of us even knew they took. And they had given us gifts, And it almost felt like you were leaving camp. It had a very emotional feeling to it. So it was really, really nice. Really good.
Nice. So you mentioned the food. How about the food overall? So you're going to restaurants, you get to pick what you want, or how does all that work? And how was the food quality and quantity?
The food quality was very good. It was all restaurants. Breakfasts were usually where we were staying. Lunches were prepared by them. They were like miracle workers. The two guides had these enormous backpacks on at all times. And I don't know how they filled them or when they filled them or what they did, but every day they prepared me a lunch for us, no matter where we were, on a glacier, in the woods, on a bike ride. There'd be a point where we were finishing up and one of them had left early and we would get to the end and picnic tables would have tablecloths. And they did, I think it was quesadillas. They were making real food. It was incredible. One day we had a charcuterie and cheese spread that was as if you were in a beautiful restaurant in France. And I don't even know where they stored this stuff. It was incredible. And then dinners were in restaurants and there was always a variety of options. And so the food was really quite good. We never had to think about it at all.
Very nice. And you mentioned the guides. Let's talk a little bit about the guides again.
Will and Heather were our guides. Will is from Western Canada and grew up there. And so he, just had incredible knowledge, like I had said earlier, about history. We talked about Lewis and Clark and them exploring across the United States and Canada and how things got established, how trails were established. They had knowledge of all of the flora and fauna. And when we were hiking and we were at certain elevations, there were certain kinds of trees. And at different elevations, there were trees that had different kinds of foliage or no foliage. And then there were no trees. They could educate us about everything. So that was great. And Heather was actually British, but she too, they were both obviously very active people who love to hike and bike and raft on their own personal time. And so she too, I don't know how they trained them, but she had a tremendous knowledge of the area, a tremendous knowledge of biking and hiking and rafting, and just wonderful personalities. They made it their business throughout all of the days to sit with different people at different times, and nobody was ever uncomfortable. It wasn't hard. They weren't hard to talk to. They were funny. We had little inside group jokes by the end, So it was, I don't know how they hire their people, but from our experience on this trip, they did a tremendous job.
I've gone on multiple active adventure tours, and that's been my experience as well, for sure. So you mentioned, I think, that you were there in September. It looks like they run this trip from like the middle of June to the middle of September. Tell us about your weather there, and would you recommend that as a good time? Or let's talk a little bit about what you encountered.
Sure. So we went, it was the beginning of September, so maybe the second week in September. The weather was beautiful. It was cool nights, warm days. They give you a packing list that was really excellent because they give you a sense of the way you should layer. And layering was really the way to go because you start out cool in the morning, but over the day you're peeling. And we all had lightweight backpacks, and those were great because you were able to put things on, take things off. We didn't really have much rain. I don't know whether there's typically rain at that time of year. As I said, we went in September because we had an empty nest and we had sort of dreamed of going on this kind of vacation when we were without children. And so I would imagine that in the summer, they may have families with children on these kinds of trips. This definitely was a grown-up trip without kids, which is probably why the age is skewed, more late 50s to 70s.
You said the packing list was good. Was there anything that you wish you had brought, or something like, oh man, this was a great thing to bring?
A hat, one of those sort of, Australian outback hats, was a lightweight, sun protection. We were very high sometimes. And so you really need to make sure you had good sun protection. The layers, I had actually gone to, I don't know if you guys have Uniqlo, but Uniqlo is an Asian store that has inexpensive clothing, but they do a lot of like down vests, but the kind that you can scrunch up into a ball and pack into a thing that you tie up at the top and it turns into nothing. And so we packed those. We had raincoats like that. We had lightweight down. And so we had a variety of different kinds of layers, but they were all really easy to pack and fit in a backpack. And it was great because sometimes you needed it, sometimes you didn't. And it was super easy to take it off and put it on. And so that guidance was very helpful.
What other, like when you look back on this trip, what are some of your fondest memories? I know the elk's got to be up in there.
Oh my gosh.
Where there's some things that, man, that comes right to mind.
For sure, that the hike we did where we were blindfolded and then we opened our eyes, that was incredible. The glacier was incredible. There is a secret thing. I don't know whether I should tell you because I don't want to ruin it for anybody that takes these trips, but there's a secret thing that they do every day that's different every day that is amazing, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. Because if you go on this trip, you will be so pleased and impressed and shocked and amazed, but it's secret every single day. So I'm not going to tell you.
Now we're going to have to go to find out, although Banff has long been on my list. I don't know why it hasn't made it to the top of my list, but definitely Banff is totally on the top 10 on my list.
The scenery is just breathtaking. It just is. And so you feel so good. You're out in nature. And so you're getting a lot of exercise. And then you don't feel badly when you eat whatever you want to eat when it's time for the meals. And you sleep beautifully because you've been outside all day. So it just, we felt really energized after the vacation, even though we did a lot of exercise.
Very nice. And we mentioned Banff. Banff is, well, also I want to ask you about crowds too, because you were there after the summer crazy season. How crowded were things? And tell us about the town itself.
So it wasn't too crowded. And I think that is, because children have gone back to school. So I think September can be a nice time to travel. Banff, there were definitely people. It wasn't empty. It wasn't as if we were the only people there. But Banff is this charming town. It's several blocks surrounded by majestic mountains. And so you see all these buildings that are not very high, and then mountains 360 degrees around you. But they have all different kinds of restaurants and shops. That was the point on the trip where if you were looking for souvenirs, this was your time, because the rest of the trip is there's nothing, you're not doing that kind of stuff. This was the point in the trip. There were 2 days in Banff where you could pop out and go into a shop, and a friend of mine bought a painting. The other friend bought a piece actually of jewelry that had a blue stone in it that reminded her of the color of the water. Mm-hmm. And so they had art galleries, they had, regular, souvenir shops, they had jewelry shops, they had all different kinds of restaurants. There was one night when we were in Banff that wasn't included in the trip, that you were on your own for dinner. So we made our own reservations. And so I think my friends and we went for fondue, for Swiss fondue.
And I should mention in Banff, you don't need a car up there. They have got great public transportation. In fact, cars are actually discouraged.
Yep. And we walked. We really walked. The hotel was not in the dead center of town, but it was, maybe 6 blocks. So we walked everywhere in Banff. We never needed any kinds of transportation.
Your best bet is really to go to Calvary and get to Banff from there, either with a tour company like Active Adventures or by public transport.
Yeah.
Any other tips that you'd like to give people about this?
I would say that just read all the materials that they send you. Their communication is excellent. From the very first day, they walk you through the process, what forms you need to fill out, what information you need, what you need to bring, where you need to be. And so, read the material, and then it's just very simple. Then you kind of turn yourself into their hands, and you don't have to do any thinking. I'm usually the one in my family that does the planning of our vacations. And so for me, it was like I turned the whole job over to someone else, and I just was along for the ride, which was kind of a treat.
It makes it a real vacation.
Yeah. I didn't have to worry about planning one place we were, one place we ate, who had to be where when. And so, in that way, too, it was a real relaxation for me.
Now that you've gone on an adventure travel vacation, is that something that you're prone to do again in the future?
For sure. Oh, definitely. We would definitely do it again. And we would absolutely use this company because our experience was so positive.
Cool. And you still get one more on your final day before you head back to Calgary. You got time for one more hike. Tell us about that.
We did. That hike was a 2-mile hike around a lake. And that's the hike where ultimately we ended up and came back, and they had this charcuterie cheese situation for one last meal before we leave. That was amazing. It was amazing. And it was a leisurely hike at your own pace. So we kind of went off in our own little groups, and we were moving really from start to finish, but not in a way that felt like all we did was hike. Like you felt like you did you did your morning activity. There was a nice lunch break. You did your afternoon activity. There was time to shower, relax a little, change, have dinner. And then honestly, there was no nightlife because we all went to bed.
Right. No, you're tired because you had a full day.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm guessing you would recommend this trip for people.
Oh, for sure.
Any final thoughts before I let you go?
No, I just think that Western Canada is an extraordinary place to visit. And I would encourage anybody that likes to travel to get to Western Canada because it is amazing. And I really would encourage somebody to get to those glaciers before they're not there anymore.
Definitely. Well, I really appreciate your time. It's been wonderful.
No problem. Thank you. It's been fun for me too.
I hope you enjoyed visiting Banff with us today. It's such an amazing place. I would love to go there. In fact, if anybody's interested in joining me, hit me up at kit@actortraveladventures.com and maybe we'll put together a group trip. That would be super fun. And don't forget, if you don't want to go with me, but you want to go by yourself, you can use that promo code ATA200, ATA200 for any multi-day adventure tour offered by my affiliate Active Adventures or their partner firm Austin Adventures. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!